So, I was looking at the stack of research for today, and I kept getting stuck on, this one single fundamental contradiction. It's a question that feels like it breaks the gears of, well, modern economics every time we try to answer it.
I think I know exactly which contradiction you're talking about.
The identity crisis of the house itself.
Yeah.
Is a home a basic human right, a utility like water or electricity that everyone must have access to? Or is it an asset class? Because the data suggests we're trying to treat it as both simultaneously.
And you can't.
And that is tearing the system apart.
It is the ultimate conflict of interest. I mean, if housing is a basic need, the goal of public policy should be to drive prices down to zero.
Or as close to zero as possible.
Right, or as close to the cost of construction as you can possibly get. But if it's the primary retirement vehicle for the middle class, which, let's be honest, it has been in the West since the post-war era, then the goal is the exact opposite.
The goal is for prices to go up.
Forever. You cannot solve for affordable and high return on investment at the same time. The goals are mutually exclusive.
And today, we are going to look at the wreckage caused by trying to solve for both. We're unpacking the global affordable housing crisis. And I want to be clear right off the top, this isn't just about high rent or, complaining about landlords.
No, this is much deeper.
We are looking at a stack of sources that covers everything from the hidden mathematical formulas that dictate where you can live to the philosophical right to build, all the way to, the slums of Nezahualcóyotl.
It's a massive scope. We have reports from the Council of Economic Advisors, granular data on zoning from the Center for Neighborhood Technology, and case studies from Vienna to Singapore, a really global perspective.
The mission for this deep dive is to get past the headlines. We all know rent is too high.
Right.
That's a boring observation. We want to know why the math is broken, who broke it, whether that was intentional or accidental, and what the actual mechanics of a solution look like.
And we need to start with the scale of this breakage, because if you are just looking at your own Zillow feed, you are completely missing the forest for the trees.
The big number from the UN report is 1.6 billion.
1.6 billion people. It's almost impossible to conceptualize a number that big.
And that is not just people who rent. That is the number of people globally living in inadequate housing.
Yeah, and we should define inadequate because it's a really important distinction.
Right. Inadequate here isn't, I don't like my countertops, or the bathroom is a bit dated.
Not at all. We are talking about lack of basic sanitation, severe overcrowding, actual structural danger, or no security of tenure.
Meaning you can be kicked out at any moment, no lease, no rights.
Correct. And if we stay on the current trajectory, by 2030, which is essentially tomorrow in terms of infrastructure planning,
it's just a few years away.
1 in 4 people on this planet may live in a slum or an informal settlement.
Think about that ratio, 1 in 4. So while we sit here in our comfortable homes, agonizing over whether a 30-year fixed mortgage is at 6% or 7%.
A quarter of the human population is just trying to construct a physical barrier between themselves and the elements. It's a completely different reality.
It puts our local complaints into perspective, but, it doesn't make the local crisis in developed nations any less painful.
Not at all. And the mechanics are actually surprisingly similar, whether you are in a favela or a suburb of Seattle.
How so?
It's fundamentally about the gap between income and the cost of the roof. That's the universal constant.
So let's start there. Let's try to define this word. Affordable. Because looking at these documents, the definition seems to be a moving target. It feels like gaslighting sometimes.
It does.
The government tells you housing is affordable if it hits a certain metric, but you still feel broke at the end of the month.
That's because the metric itself is, well, it's pretty arbitrary. The gold standard that most listeners in North America will know is the 30% rule.
Right. The idea that if you spend more than 30% of your gross income on rent and utilities, you are officially housing burdened.
And if you spend more than 50%, you're severely burdened.
Which sounds so clinical.
It is. But here's the nugget that usually gets left out of the nightly news. Where did that 30% number actually come from? It wasn't handed down on a stone tablet. It wasn't derived from a nutritional study of what a human needs to survive.
No, it came from the Senate floor in 1969.
Yeah.
It was politics.
Exactly. The Brooke Amendment, named after Senator Edward Brooke. Initially, the cap for public housing rent was set at 25% of income.
And the logic for that 25% was pretty sound. Right?
It was. The logic was that a family needed the other 75% of their income for, everything else. Food, clothes, transportation, the basics of life.
which makes sense in 1969. But then the 80s happened.
Then the 80s happened. Budget cuts in 1981. To reduce the federal subsidy for public housing, Congress just pushed the tenants' contribution up from 25% to 30%.
So it wasn't an economic decision based on affordability research?
Not at all. It was a budget hawk decision to save federal dollars. And that number 30% just calcified. It somehow became the standard definition of affordability for the entire market, public and private.
So we are measuring our financial health with a ruler that was literally forged from 1980s budget cuts.
That's a great way to put it. And the problem with a flat percentage, any flat percentage, is that it completely ignores the absolute value of money.
Yeah, I mean, if I make $1 million a year and spend 50% on housing, I still have $500,000 to live on.
You're doing just fine.
I'm not severely burdened. But if you make $20,000 a year and you spend that affordable 30% on housing,
You have $14,000 left. For the whole year, that remaining 70% might not even cover food and medicine, let alone a car payment or saving for an emergency. The percentage is regressive. It hurts the poor more than the rich.
which is why the data from 2022 is flashing red all over the place. About half of U.S. renters are in the so-called safe zone, under that 30% threshold.
But that means half aren't, and inside that half,
A massive chunk, 1 in 4 renters in the entire country, is paying over 50%.
that is the danger zone. When half your income vanishes to the landlord on the first of the month, the math for the rest of your life just breaks. It doesn't work.
You aren't saving for retirement.
Yeah.
You aren't fixing your car when the check engine light comes on.
You're definitely not. You are one minor emergency, a sick kid, a flat tire away from addiction.
I noticed in the research that Australia takes a different approach to this, which seems, I don't know, much more humane. They use what they call a residual income model.
Yes. It's a much smarter way of looking at it. Instead of a cold percentage, the Australian model asks a very simple question. After you pay for housing, do you have enough money left to meet your other basic needs?
So it focuses on what remains in your wallet.
Which is what actually matters to a family. It's not about the percentage. It's about what you have left to live on.
It treats housing as the first eater.
The first eater. I like that.
It eats first, and you have to survive on the crumbs. If the crumbs aren't enough to buy a loaf of bread, then the housing wasn't affordable, regardless of what percentage it was.
Precisely. Now, for the people trying to buy, the aspiring homeowners out there, there's another metric in our stack that explains why everyone feels so hopeless. It's called the median multiple.
This is the World Bank and UN standard, right?
It is. And it's brutally simple division.
Yeah.
You take the median house price in a city and you divide it by the median household income.
And historically, a healthy market, a sane market, had a multiple of about 3.0.
Right. Meaning the average house costs 3 times the average annual salary.
And there's reason for that number, isn't there? It connects back to how banks used to underwrite mortgages.
It does. There was the old rule of 28 in banking. It generally said your mortgage payment shouldn't exceed 28% of your income.
Which is pretty close to that 30% rule we were just talking about.
Exactly. And at reasonable interest rates, a 3.0 price-to-income ratio fits perfectly into that box. It creates sustainable debt. You can pay it off without bankrupting yourself.
But looking at the data for major global cities today, 3.0 is a fantasy. It's a fairy tale.
It's ancient history. We are seeing multiples of 10, 15, even 20 in places like Hong Kong, Vancouver, Sydney, and large parts of California.
So just to do the math for the listener, if you make $100,000 a year, which is a great salary in most places,
well, a very good salary.
a healthy house for you should cost around $300,000. But in these markets, that starter home is $1.5 million.
Right.
Or $2 million.
Which means the local wages have completely disconnected from the local housing stock. The people who work in the city, the teachers, the firefighters, the nurses, can literally never earn enough in wages to buy a piece of the city they maintain.
This leads to the classic debate, the one you hear all the time. Is this an income problem or a price problem? Are houses too expensive or are we just too poor?
Well, the obvious answer is it's both, but the income inequality argument is really strong. For the bottom 60% of earners, real wages have been relatively stagnant for decades when you adjust for inflation.
Right. The paycheck just doesn't stretch as far.
Meanwhile, the asset class housing has appreciated wildly, far outpacing inflation or wage growth. But there is a hidden variable here, one that I think is the biggest aha moment in this entire deep dive.
You're talking about the H+T index.
The Housing Plus Transportation Index, developed by the Center for Neighborhood Technology. This This changes the map completely.
Let's walk through this because this just destroys the standard advice given to every young family for generations.
It really does.
And that advice is drive till you qualify.
Drive till you qualify. Exactly. Can't afford the city center. Okay, move to the suburbs. Can't afford the inner ring suburbs. Move to the exurbs. Move an hour away. The rent drops. You get a yard for the kids.
And if you're just looking on Zillow or Redfin, that looks like a huge win. You trade a $3,000 a month two-bedroom apartment for a $1,500 a month mortgage on a house.
You think you just saved $1,500 a month. You think you're a financial genius.
But you didn't. You didn't save a dime.
Because transportation is the second largest expense for American households right after housing. When you move that far out, you are now legally married to your car. Or, more likely, 2 cars for a household with 2 working adults.
And we aren't just talking about the cost of gas. That's what people focus on.
No, it's so much more. We're talking insurance, which is not cheap. We're talking maintenance, repairs, tires, depreciation.
And the time cost. We tend to value our commute time at $0 in our personal accounting. But it's not zero.
It is absolutely not zero. It's time away from your kids. It's time you aren't working a side gig or learning a new skill. It's stress on your body and your mental health.
So the Center for Neighborhood Technology ran the numbers. They said, okay, let's stop looking at just the 30% housing rule. That's a broken metric. Let's look at housing plus transportation combined. And they set a new benchmark for affordability.
45% of income.
So roughly 30% for the roof, 15% for the wheels. That seems reasonable.
It seems very reasonable. But when you apply that filter to the map of the United States,
the map of affordable America shrinks violently.
it's a shock. If you just look at housing costs alone, about 55% of neighborhoods in the U.S. look affordable.
So more than half the country seems okay.
Seems okay. But when you add the transportation costs of those cheap exurbs, the affordable inventory drops to just 26%.
Wait, run that by me again so we lose nearly 30 percentage points.
We lose more than that. The number of neighborhoods drops from 55% to 26%. They are illusionary affordable.
We lose nearly 60,000 neighborhoods from the affordable list.
They're a mirage. You think you're saving money, but you're not. You save $500 on rent, but you end up spending $700 on the fleet of vehicles you now need just to buy a gallon of milk. You are actually poorer than if you had stayed in the expensive city center where you could walk or take a bus.
That is the trap. The drive till you qualify advice is actually a mechanism for capping social mobility.
That's it, exactly.
You move out to save money, and the gas pump bleeds you dry, while the odometer destroys the resale value of your primary asset besides the house, your car.
Exactly. It explains why so many people feel so squeezed even when they move to so-called low cost of living areas. The cost of living isn't low. It's just shifted from the landlord to the auto mechanic and the oil company.
So we've established that the demand side is messy wages are low, our metrics are broken, and the hidden cost of transport is high.
But let's pivot to the thing that really, it makes my blood boil when you read this research. The supply side.
Yes. The why can't we just build more question.
Exactly. If 1.6 billion people need homes, that sounds like a massive business opportunity. Why aren't developers flooding the zone with cheap apartments? Is it just pure greed?
It's not just greed. Greed is a factor in any market, but the real issue is that we have made it incredibly, prohibitively expensive to even ask for permission to build. We have to talk about the right to build tax.
Yeah, to be clear, this isn't a tax you see on a receipt. This isn't a line item.
No, it's an invisible tax.
Yeah.
This comes from a 2007 study by Glazer and Tabayo. Right. And what they wanted to do was isolate the cost of bureaucracy. Not the cost of lumber, not the cost of labor, not even the cost of the land itself, just the cost of the regulatory apparatus.
The red tape.
How did they even calculate that?
Huh.
Because that seems so intangible.
It's a very clever methodology. They compared the cost of homes on quarter-acre lots versus half-acre lots in the same area.
Okay.
By stripping away the difference in the quantity of land and the construction costs, which are basically the same,
Right.
they could isolate the regulatory premium, the cost of the permit, the zoning delays, the environmental reviews, the legal battles with neighbors.
And the numbers they found for a city like San Francisco were startling.
That's an understatement. In San Francisco, the right to build, meaning just the cost of navigating the bureaucracy to get the green light added, approximately $600,000 to the cost of a single new house.
$600,000.
Yes.
That's a luxury home in most of the country. In San Francisco, that is just the cost of paper and time.
It's mostly time. If a project takes 5, 6, 7 years to get approved, you are paying interest on the land loan that whole time. You're paying lawyers, you're paying consultants and architects to tweak the plans over and over. All of that gets baked into the final price of the home.
So when people scream at developers for building luxury condos, they're kind of missing the point.
They're pointing the finger at the wrong villain.
If the entry fee just to break ground is $600,000, you can't build affordable housing. It's not possible. You literally cannot build a $200,000 unit if the permit cost is triple that.
Precisely. Regulation sets a floor price. If you make it illegal or prohibitively expensive to build, you won't get cheap housing. You'll only get housing for the people who can afford the $600,000 premium on top of everything else.
And this leads us directly to zoning, the invisible lines on the map that dictate everything.
Zoning is often presented as this benign safety measure. We don't want a coal plant next to a kindergarten.
Which, sure, I agree with that. No one wants that. Industrial and residential should be separate.
Of course. But it has morphed over decades into a tool to effectively outlaw the bottom end of the housing market. And we see this most clearly with things like minimum unit sizes.
The 400 square foot rule.
Right. Many cities mandate that a new apartment must be at least 400 square feet. Now, on the surface, that sounds nice. Everyone deserves space.
That sounds humane.
It does. But what if I only have $600 a month for rent? I can't afford 400 square feet. I might be perfectly happy in a 200 square foot micro studio with a shared kitchen.
But the city says, no, that's too small. You're not allowed to live there. So where do I go?
You don't go to the micro studio because it was never built. It was illegal to build. So you go to the straight.
Yeah.
Or you cram 3 people into a 1-bedroom illegal sublet. By outlawing small, cheap legal options, we haven't raised standards. We've just removed the bottom rung of the ladder.
And then you add the car back into the mix. This is where it gets really crazy. Parking minimums.
The silent killer of affordability.
I was reading about Los Angeles in the research. In some new developments, a single parking space can cost $75,000 to build. Is that real?
It's very real. If you are building an underground parking structure, yes. Concrete is expensive. Digging giant holes in the ground is expensive. So if the city code requires 1 or even 2 parking spots per apartment unit.
You are forcing the developer to build a bedroom for the tenant and a bedroom for their Toyota.
And the tenant pays for both, of course, even if they don't own a car. That $75,000 cost is amortized into the rent of every single unit in the building.
So it's a subsidy.
It's a massive hidden subsidy from renters who don't own cars to renters who do, and it's mandated by the government.
It's just wild when you look at it that way. We are prioritizing the housing of automobiles over the housing of humans.
And then you have the pure politics of it all. NIMBism. Not in my backyard.
The letter of acknowledgement in L.A. This story blew my mind. It sounds like something from the Middle Ages, not modern America.
It was almost feudal. Until 2018, if you wanted to build an affordable housing project in the city of Los Angeles, you needed a letter of acknowledgement from the specific city council member of that district.
And they could just not sign it for any reason.
They could just pocket veto it, no reason given, just silence. And the project dies on the vine. It gave a single politician unilateral power to block housing for thousands of people.
And they would use that power to appease local homeowners who didn't want those people moving into their neighborhood.
Those people being teachers, nurses, baristas, restaurant workers, the people who make the city actually run.
Exactly. We want their labor during the day. We just don't want their presence after 5:00 p.m. We want them to have a 2-hour commute.
That's the implicit message.
So we have a system where the math is hidden, the commute is bankrupting us, and the regulations make it illegal to build what we actually need. But if you think the situation in San Francisco or LA is bad, we need to widen the aperture. We need to talk about the mega cities.
This is where the sheer numbers become overwhelming. For the first time in human history, the majority of humans now live in cities. And we aren't just talking about cities like Paris or Chicago. We are talking about urban agglomerations.
The Yangtze Delta region in China is approaching 80 million people.
80 million.
The Tokyo-Yokohama region is at 100 million, a single contiguous urban area.
And when that many people flood into a system that isn't building enough formal housing, or where the formal housing is completely unaffordable for new arrivals, you get the informal settlement, the slum.
The source material highlights Nezahualcóyotl in Mexico.
It sits on the sprawling outskirts of Mexico City. It is the largest slum in the world. It's home to nearly 4 million people.
4 million people. That's larger than the population of roughly half the states in the U.S., just in one informal sprawl.
And these places form because of rural to urban migration. People leave the countryside looking for economic opportunity, but the city's economic stagnation or lack of planning leaves them with nowhere to go. So they build where they can, often without title to the land or access to basic utilities like water and electricity.
And this brings us to the most visible, visceral edge of the crisis, at least in developed countries: homelessness. We have a report here from the Council of Economic Advisors from 2019, and it breaks down the drivers of homelessness in a way that is, honestly, it's a bit cold, but it's very revealing.
It's an economic analysis of a human tragedy. And they identified four main drivers. The first one we just beat to death: overregulation.
The report makes a pretty stunning claim. It claims that if we deregulated housing markets in just 11 constrained metros, homelessness would drop by 54% in San Francisco.
That's what their model suggests. It puts forward the idea that homelessness isn't just a social pathology, it is primarily a supply problem, a housing price problem.
The idea being that if housing is cheap enough, most people, even those struggling, find a way to pay for it.
But when the absolute bottom rung of the ladder is a $2,000 a month apartment, people just fall off. There's no safety net.
But then there are the other drivers. The second one is climate.
It's grim physics, really. It is physically easier to survive sleeping on the street in Los Angeles or San Diego than it is in Chicago or Boston in February.
You're less likely to freeze to death.
Exactly. So the unsheltered population naturally skews toward warmer climates. It's a rational choice under irrational circumstances.
But driver number 3.
Yeah.
This is the one that's going to make some listeners uncomfortable. It's the right to shelter paradox.
This one is very counterintuitive. There are places like New York City or the state of Massachusetts that have a legal right to shelter. If you are homeless, the government must provide you a bed.
Which sounds like the most humane and decent thing to do.
It is. It comes from a place of compassion. But the economic argument in the report is that because the quality of that shelter is relatively high, it has heat, security, food services, it becomes a viable substitute for the bottom end of the private market housing.
So if my only private market option is a dangerous, illegal basement apartment for $800 a month that eats half my income,
Right.
or I can go to a free shelter bed that is safe and warm, I might choose the shelter.
That's the theory. It increases the demand for shelter beds because the shelter starts to compete with the private market. And it can create this feedback loop where having a right to shelter can statistically increase the sheltered homeless population. Not necessarily the total homeless population, but the number of people in the system.
It's a difficult trade-off. You want to help, but the help itself changes the incentives. But we absolutely can't ignore the fourth driver, the individual factors.
Mental illness and substance abuse.
The numbers are high. The report says about 20% of the homeless population suffers from a severe mental illness. Another 16% have a chronic substance abuse problem.
And this is where the policy of housing first comes into the conversation. For a long time, the model was treatment first. Solve your addiction, get your mental health in order, then you get a house.
Which sounds logical on paper.
But housing first flipped that on its head. It said, give them the house first, give them a stable foundation, then solve the addiction.
Because it's really, really hard to get sober when you're living under a bridge.
It's nearly impossible. You need stability first. But now we are seeing a bit of a shift, a refinement of that model back toward housing plus services. Because a roof alone doesn't cure schizophrenia. You need the support structure to go along with the physical structure.
And there is a ticking clock in the U.S. right now regarding this, the emergency housing vouchers from the pandemic.
The EHV funding, a lot of that is expected to expire by the end of 2026. If that funding dries up without a replacement, we could see a massive spike in homelessness numbers right when we think we're starting to get a handle on them.
Now, we've talked a lot about the people directly experiencing this crisis, the burdened renters, the homeless. But the housing crisis doesn't just stay inside the house. It ripples out. It infects the rest of society.
It affects everything. Let's start with public health. Housing is health. They are inextricable.
This is huge. If your house is damp or cold because you can't afford proper heating or repairs, you get respiratory diseases. Asthma rates in children skyrocket.
Exactly. We already mentioned homelessness is officially recognized as a public health issue. But even beyond that, think about education. There was a study in Boston that looked at this.
Right.
It showed that foreclosures and frequent moves have a direct negative impact on student test scores and attendance.
It makes total sense. If a kid doesn't know where they are going to be sleeping next month, how can they possibly be expected to focus on algebra?
They can't. But here is the kicker from that study. It affects the other kids too, the ones who are stably housed.
How?
Teachers in classrooms with high student turnover have to slow down the instructional pacing for everyone to accommodate the new kids coming in and the old kids leaving. So, if your neighbor's housing is unstable, your child's education literally slows down.
That is a powerful point.
Huh.
High rent in your community makes the whole class learn slower. It's a collective problem.
Then there's the labor market, what economists call the spatial mismatch.
This is when businesses complain they can't find workers. You hear it all the time. Nobody wants to work.
The workers are there. They exist. They just live 2 hours away because that's the only place they could afford, and they can't afford the gas and the time for a 4-hour round-trip commute for a $15 an hour job.
So when housing pushes labor away from capital, businesses lose competitiveness. They can't staff their shops.
And the whole regional economy suffers.
Okay, we have depressed everyone sufficiently. Let's pivot. Let's open the toolkit. Because people are trying to solve this. And there's some really cool innovation happening, both in design and in policy.
Let's start with the physical stuff, the actual buildings. If you live in a U.S. city, you have seen the 5/1.
Oh, yeah. The boxy, colorful apartment buildings that seem to pop up overnight on every vacant lot.
Sometimes called the Texas donut. It refers to a specific construction style.
Yeah.
5 stories of wood framing sitting on top of a 1-story concrete podium. 5/1.
Why is this specific shape taking over the entire country? What's so special about it?
It exploits a sweet spot in the International Building Code. Wood is cheap. Concrete is expensive. By putting the parking and the ground floor retail in the concrete base, and then using fire-treated wood for the residential units above, you maximize density while keeping construction costs as low as possible.
So it's the most efficient way we currently have to build mid-rise density.
By far.
And then we have a classic making a comeback, the triple-decker.
The New England classic. It's all over Boston and Providence. 3 floors, 3 distinct family units. It fits on a standard single-family lot, but it triples the housing supply. It's what urban planners call gentle density.
You don't have to build a giant tower.
No, it fits right into the neighborhood fabric.
And what about container housing? I feel like shipping container homes were a huge trend on Instagram and Pinterest for a while, but are they actually practical?
Standard shipping containers are actually terrible for housing. They're just steel boxes, you freeze in the winter and you bake in the summer, and they're full of toxic paint.
Right. Not ideal.
But there is a specific type of container that works really well. They're called reefer containers.
As in refrigerated.
Yes. They are the ones used to transport food, produce, things that need to be kept cold. So they already have high-grade insulation built directly into the walls, the ceiling, and the floor.
So they solve the biggest problem from the start.
Exactly. Using reefer containers is a very viable path for quick, modular, well-insulated housing.
And then there's adaptive reuse. We have all these empty office buildings downtown post-pandemic.
This is going to be huge. Some estimates suggest that 90% of U.S. real estate growth by 2033 will come from adaptive reuse. Why build a whole new shell when you have a perfectly good concrete frame sitting empty downtown? It's greener, it's faster, and it's often cheaper.
Now let's talk policy, because you can build a cool container home, but if the ownership model is predatory, it doesn't really help. What is NOA?
NOA stands for Naturally Occurring Affordable Housing. This isn't a government program. This refers to the existing older housing stock.
The dingy 1970s apartment buildings with the avocado green appliances.
Exactly. The stuff that is affordable just because it isn't brand new and shiny. The strategy here is preservation. Instead of letting that building get torn down for luxury condos, a nonprofit or a public-private partnership buys these units specifically to keep them as they are. You preserve the existing affordability.
I love the concept of community land trusts, or CLTs. This feels like a really deep structural fix.
This is a game changer. In a CLT, a nonprofit owns the land underneath the house. The homeowner owns the house itself that's sitting on it.
So you take the cost of the land, which is often the most expensive part, completely out of the mortgage equation.
Exactly. And because the trust owns the land in perpetuity, they can put restrictions on the resale price of the house. So if you sell, you get some modest profit, but the house has to remain affordable for the next low-income family.
You kill speculation. You can't flip a CLT home for a massive profit.
You can't. It treats housing as a community asset to be stewarded, not as a winning lottery ticket.
And co-ops, specifically mutual aid co-ops. The outline mentions FUCVM in Uruguay. This is an incredible story.
FUCVM is amazing. It's a federation of housing cooperatives, and their model is based on sweat equity.
So you pay with your own labor instead of just cash.
A big chunk of it, yes. Families contribute a set number of hours of labor per week to actually build the homes. This lowers the financial cost significantly, but maybe more importantly, it builds a powerful community. You know your neighbors because you poured their foundation with them.
Wow.
They have housed over 25,000 families this way in Uruguay. It's a massive success.
That is inspiring.
Yeah.
Let's look at who else is doing it differently on a national or citywide scale. We always hear about Vienna, Austria. It's always cited as the gold standard of housing.
It really is. In Vienna, social housing isn't stigmatized. It isn't the projects. It's just housing, high-quality housing.
And that's because it's for the middle class too, right? It's not just for the very poor.
Yes. The income limits to qualify are quite high. As a result, about 46% of the entire city's housing stock is either government-owned or subsidized public-private partnerships.
Almost half the city.
And because so many people from all walks of life live there, doctors, teachers, mechanics, artists, it is maintained to a very high standard.
And because it's nearly half the market, private landlords can't price gouge. They have to compete with the high-quality public option.
Exactly. It acts as a massive anchor on prices for the entire city.
What about Germany? I know Berlin has had some major issues with rent control, but the city of Hamburg has an interesting model.
They have something called the Alliance for Housing Construction. It's basically a grand bargain. The city says to private developers, we will give you city-owned land and fast-track your permits, no 7-year delays.
And in exchange?
In exchange, you agree to build X number of units per year, and 30% of them must be permanently reserved for low- and middle-income households.
It's a trade. Efficiency for affordability.
And in China, they have a fascinating system called tradable land quotas. This allows development on the city outskirts, which increases supply, but it's done in exchange for protecting agricultural land somewhere else. It's a way to balance the massive urbanization we talked about with the need to still grow food for 1.4 billion people.
So we have solutions. We have the technology, the reefers, the 5/1s. We have the policy models, the CLTs, the Vienna-style social housing. But it all comes down to political will.
It always does.
And that brings us to the outro. I want to return to that philosophical question we started with.
The litmus test.
One of our sources had this beautiful, haunting line. It said that society's housing policy reveals the warmth or coldness of heart toward those of lower socioeconomic status.
That hits home, doesn't it? Are we warm or are we cold to the people who serve our coffee, teach our children, and clean our offices?
Our zoning maps suggest we are pretty cold.
They do.
And here is a final provocative thought for you to chew on. We talked about supply. Most of the sources suggest that increasing supply, even building market-rate luxury housing, eventually helps affordability across the board.
Right, through a process called filtering.
If a rich person buys a new luxury condo, they move out of a slightly older, slightly less luxurious premium unit. An upper-middle-class person moves into that. They vacate a middle-class unit. It creates this chain reaction that eventually opens up a unit at the bottom.
It frees up inventory at every price point.
So if that's true, why is there such intense resistance to building anything, even luxury housing, in so many communities?
Yeah.
We often hear people say they want to preserve the character of their neighborhood.
And the question that leaves me with is, what is the trade-off we are making between character, which often means the aesthetic look of a street, and the ability for actual human beings to live there?
If a neighborhood has perfect character, but no one can afford to live in it except for the ultra-wealthy, is it really a neighborhood? Or is it just a museum?
That is the question we have to answer as a society.
We want you to do one thing for us this week. Look up your local zoning map. Just Google it for your town or city. See what your neighborhood is actually zoned for. Is it illegal to build a duplex next to you? Is there a minimum lot size? Is there a parking minimum?
You might be really surprised by what those invisible lines on the map are doing to your community and to your own rent check.
Thanks for diving deep with us.
Take care.